This is actually, the French went to the Israelis, and, who weren't planning to attack. The Israelis had no intention of attacking Nasser at this point. The French came up with this wonderful plan. Hey, you go into the Sinai, and then we'll freak out because there's, oh my God, there's war going on here. And we, the British and the French, will go in and we'll separate the combatants, that's you, and the Egyptians, and we'll take over the Suez Canal. Pretty simple plan. Outrageous, scary, and a bit insane. And that's what happened, actually, just like that. So the French take it to the British and say, we know Dulles is stopping us from actually invading the Egyptians, but what if we just separate the combatants? We're not invading. Oh no, we're not doing that. We're protecting international shipping, and there's a war going on, and we're the saviors. And so the British are like, that's a great plan too. So that's what happens. But in the meantime, what's also happening is the Soviet Union starts to get overly active and invades Hungary. And so on November 4th, you have Soviet tanks invading Budapest. And November 5th, you have British soldiers in Port Said. And so that's Suez. All this time, America's in the dark. We didn't know that there was this collusion going on against Egypt. And this is the plan, as I mentioned. It called for Israel to attack, and UK and France would arrive at Suez to separate the parties. And sure enough, October 29th, Israel invades. Funny thing though, the Israelis are too good. There was no resistance against the Israeli invasion. There were no massive troop buildups on the Egyptian Sinai. They didn't worry that the Israelis were going to attack them by land, certainly. And so the Israelis just kept on going. And before they could even get close to the Suez Canal, the French and the British are outraged, I say, that there's war going on in the Suez Canal. And we're going to go protect shipping, and shipping's going fine, by the way. And the Israelis are like, well, give us another day or two, please. We're nowhere near the Suez Canal, like 40 kilometers away. But sure enough, as I say, November 5th, they land their paratroops at Port Said, and by then the collusion is well known. The last bit of this is that while the world is outraged, while the Great Britain, there were more demonstrations in London against the Prime Minister Eden than perhaps there were in much of the Arab world. Britons were outraged at their own lies, deception, as one person talks about the sexed up intelligence. Does that sound familiar to you? So they land, as I say, one day before President Eisenhower's re-election. That was not convenient timing. And so at the United Nations, and this is one of those ironies of history, that John Foster Dulles, the man who ordered the overthrow of Mossadegh and the intervention in Iran, has to go to and condemn his two strongest allies, Great Britain and France, plus this new kid, Israel. And the U.S. Treasury Department, what gets Britain and France out? It's not threats, it's not condemnations from Dulles or from Eisenhower. The British economy tanked. The British pound sterling lost virtually all its value. Banks were about to close. The economy was about to collapse. And Eisenhower said, do you need any help with that? Because we can shore up that pound sterling like in 3 minutes, or at least maybe 3 hours in those days. But it's just a couple transactions, and we can help you with that pound sterling. How's that going for you? But we just got one little thing we need from you, and that's just stop the stupid war, pull out your troops, get the French gone, tell the Israelis to go home. Ultimately, that's what happens. Anthony Eden also resigns. I'll talk about that in a second. But the last bullet point I want to mention is that wars tend to lead to wars, in Israel-Palestine. And so the 48 war set up some things that led to the 56 war. But really what happened in 1956, what we did at the end of that was establish something, and this is the United Nations Emergency Force, that we lost control over by May 1967, so 10 years later. So this UN emergency force that we put in place in 1956, 57, to prevent Israel from attacking Egypt again, that became the tripwire for the 1967 war. And what happened in 67 became the tripwire for 1973 and on and on and on. So it is important to think about these historical factors. But no, you don't have to know all of this history. You just drop in anywhere. The story's the same. Sadly. Oh, how did that get in here? I didn't mean to editorialize. Lies, deception, sexed up intelligence, separate the warring sides, weapons of mass destruction, regime change, etc. But the 1956 consequences were again things that, self-fulfilling prophecies, right? The United States wants Egypt to join the Baghdad Pact to prevent Soviet expansion. And what do we have? The Soviet Union jumping over this belt called the Baghdad Pact. Containment? I can fly over it. We come to Cairo, we have direct control of the military and the finances, and we're building the Suez Canal, the Aswan Dam. And America and Britain and the World Bank are nowhere to be seen. So that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Anthony Eden resigns. He is a laughingstock. He looks like he was insane at that time. Charles de Gaulle takes over as president after the defeat, after the humiliation of the French in the 56 war. And what does he do? He withdraws from Algeria. So all that stuff about maintaining Algeria is like, never mind. Rosanna Dana, wasn't that her? Yes, okay. The Eisenhower Doctrine gets put into place saying, okay, well, we did all these things against our enemies, against our friends, but we really do have enemies in the world, and that's the Soviet Union, and we are going to establish a doctrine that says any country that needs the support of the United States against communists, whatever those are, will have our support. The real hero in the conflict, of course, is Nasser, Gamal Abdel Nasser. He's larger than life. He is puffed up into this giant of a political figure across the world, not just the Arab world, and especially in the Arab world, in the Muslim world somewhat, in Africa too. But this guy was larger than life. He stood up to the British and the French and the Israelis, and he was still standing. He would go on Radio Cairo, and he would call people in the streets of Beirut and in Damascus and Amman, Jordan, call them to demonstrate, and they sure did. So in 1958, you had an Iraqi military coup. You had Jordan, Lebanon threatened. This is when the Eisenhower Doctrine was invoked, and U.S. Marines had to land in Beirut, and British Marines also had to go to Amman to prop up young King Hussein. And on and on. I think I want to just leave you with this, and I'll leave you with a 2-minute clip, just to give you an image of what's going on here.
This is Egypt, 1956. These are British paratroopers fighting on the orders of British Prime Minister Anthony Eden. He has gambled on a war in a desperate bid to destroy Egypt's new young president, Gamal Abdel Nasser.
I'm utterly convinced that the action we have taken is right.
This is a war over who will run this Egyptian waterway, the Suez Canal, and the vital oil supplies which are transported through it. Suez is a crisis which will push the world to the brink of nuclear catastrophe.
At that moment I did think this is really going to be the Third World War.
In Britain, we know Suez is a war based on a Prime Minister's lie, a lie which destroys him.
The MI6 sexed up their intelligence.
But seen from the other side, Suez is a story of how a small, poor Arab country defended itself against the Western world and won.
People will defend their country, they will defend their land.
In February 1955, Egypt's young president Gamal Abdel Nasser meets British Prime Minister Anthony Eden for the first time. The two men dislike one another from the start.
The impression of President Nasser about Anthony Eden was that he was small church, not, committed with imposing the British point of view on the other side.
For Eden, Egypt remains part of Britain's sphere of influence in the Middle East. Although nominally independent since 1922, Egyptian kings have dutifully done what British prime ministers have told them to do.
Eden believed in the legend of the empire, but the world was different. Eden didn't realize the change in the balance of power.
Anthony Eden is every inch the Conservative Prime Minister. Educated at Eton and Oxford, he was Foreign Secretary during the war, and is Winston Churchill's hand-picked successor. But in Nasser, Eden encounters a new kind of Arab leader. He is part of a new generation of Egyptians determined to secure real independence for their country.
الحرية، حق تقرير المصير، القضاء على الاستعمار، عدم الانحياز، السعي في السلم الإيجابي.
Nasser is one of a group of officers who had overthrown the playboy King Farouk in 1952. 2 years later, Nasser had shown Britain that Egypt would not be pushed around. An aggressive guerrilla campaign forces the British to evacuate 88,000 soldiers from the biggest base in the world on the banks of the Suez Canal.
At that time, what was most important is real independence and to get free, really free.
France agrees to supply Israel with the Jewish state's first jet fighters. To Nasser, it looks like an increasingly powerful enemy is at the gates.
The French are giving Israel arms. I am confronting a situation that may distract my country. Should I stand still?
So Nasser decides he too will look abroad for arms. As with the loan for his dam, his first call is on the United States.
Nasser, from the first day of the revolution, asked the Americans, I need arms. Our army needs arms. And he asked the British the same question. Neither the British nor the Americans gave a response to that.
But this is the 1950s, the depths of the Cold War. The West and the Soviet Union are locked in a battle for influence across the world. Nasser knows that if Washington says no, then maybe Nikita Khrushchev in Moscow will say yes.
Nasser was an anti-communist. The Soviets knew full well he was anti-communist. They knew that he was putting communists in jail. He didn't let those communists out of jail when his relations improved with the Soviet Union. But both sides made a pragmatic decision.
We agree.
Okay, sorry, I just wanted to give you a sense of this. This PowerPoint will be available on the website, so and if you're interested in that, there's just another like 5 minutes of that one. This is a 3-part series that the BBC did more recently, and it takes you from the beginning all the way through to the end and beyond, as I've done. But I wanted to give you a visual sense as well of some of these players. So I think it's appropriate now to maybe take a. Do you want to take a break? Is that what you do? Okay, we'll take a break and we'll be back for 45 minutes or so of Q&A. Okay? Thank you.